epilogue, I'd like to show you where you might be able to do further research if you're interested in this type of 18th century construction that you would see. 19th century construction, most definitely. So in no particular order, you could learn more about the warded lock, the lever tumbler lock. Those each successively gave way to the predominance of the pin tumbler lock, which is what we primarily use. We certainly use it every day, but it's primarily the lock technology that is used by everyone all the time. Even a tubular key, that round key with the nib on it that you'd see in a vending machine or in a coin-operated laundry mat type facility, those are pin tumblers in there as well. It's just in a radial sort of fashion. So, first of all, in our website, we have the link to the manufacturer's page. Because Yale and Corbin Russwin, because Yale and P.F. Corbin and Sargent as well, most definitely, are lock manufacturers that go back to basically the second half of the 19th century. There are several examples from those lock companies. Well, for Yale, we have some old catalogs. I have catalogs from 1880 to 1937 from a historical perspective. So let's open up the catalog from 1880, and as that loads, and Yale is a good example because it was indeed Yale, Linus Yale Jr., as I had mentioned earlier, who patented the modern pin tumbler cylinder. And a search online will certainly be able to find easily this patent. This is not real. This is definitely not the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, definitely not. It's a little bit too late, so to speak. But the concept of these tumblers was popularized by Linus Yale Jr. And Linus Yale Sr., he was a lockmaker as well, just focused on the banking security. So these pin tumblers here, okay? So we go to Yale because they've been in the game since the mid-19th century. It's not hard to look up a history of Linus Yale Jr. So as we're looking at a 1880 catalog, literally the year Garfield was elected, okay? I think he was the 20th president. So this goes back. You're going to find that Yale had a marketing effort going on simultaneously, which was their Yale lock, the pin tumbler lock. This was a flat key, no corrugations to it, a very early example of the pin tumbler technology. But at the same time, they were making the standard locks, and they were certainly looking to market as, oh, you want the regular one? Well, you go over here and wait in this really long line. You want the standard lock. If you want the newest technology, you want the Yale lock. And there is a substantial, outrageous substantial leap forward in capability of this platform over this platform, and the sense of the amount of potential different keys that you could have in a master keyed environment. And while that may not have mattered to the average person in 1880, the industrialization of the United States in the Northeast was, well on its way, meaning buildings, and buildings have doors, and companies have many buildings. The railroad magnates, transportation magnates, banking, and then just, manufacturing. Large facilities would have benefited by being able to have the segregation of their, I suppose it's a poor term for the time, but the segregation of doors based on rights and privileges over a key. The standard or bit key it really falls flat in that department. So as we scroll through this catalog where they offer standard locks as well as the modern pin tumbler lock, we're going to scroll through, and as we do, we're going to scroll past the pin tumbler locks. And because this catalog is a bit sticky, I'll pause the video. And it's just because it's such a large file. You'll notice that there are no corrugations in the face of the keyway. Well, the proper term for that is that it's a key that would have multiple angles like this would be called paracentric, meaning the center line crosses the vertical axis. This 1880 technology did not feature that. Well, they soon found that any instrument would be very easy at just lifting the pins, so they came up with the paracentric keyway, and Yale definitely calls their primary keyway the para, P-A-R-A, short for paracentric. And as we continue to scroll through, that is a double-bitted key that's there, and we'll have a very ingenious system of levers on the inside of the lock. But as we get to the standard locks, Japanned black, Japanned black, that's what that means. Ebony. So, you know, ebony's down here in the cheapest column, you know, as I suspected it would be. So let's get to where we can look at the inside of a standard lock, so to speak. So these are mortise lock versions of this type of construction. And obviously they, you know, rim locks as well. Now here is a prime example of a bit lock, of a bit key lock that has lever tumblers. So this is the technology that proceeded, that came after the warded lock. So that bit key with the cuts, as I had attempted to explain earlier, when those are lifted, the depth of that cut on the bit will serve to force the lever tumblers into alignment such that the fence can enter the gates. And you'll see that there are these different steps. The bellies on all of these levers are the same belly. That wasn't always the case, but they found it easier to pick those locks open when they had different, when you could visually inspect the lock through the keyhole and notice the different bellies, and that would give an indication as to how far you had to lift the lever. Well, they made all the bellies the same, and they changed where the double-gated cutout would be in the lever tumbler itself to allow the fence to pass through. So the depth of the cuts on the bit, when that's rotated up, will lift these lever tumblers to differing degrees of lift, allowing that right there, that post is called the fence. That fence is attached to the entire back plate back here, which is the bolt itself. When that fence and that bolt are on the same piece of material, just like our Baldwin lock. So this catalog's from 1880, and this technology is 150 years past the warded lock. At least 200 years past. There may have been a mention of it. You know, I've forgotten so much of what I've read, like I would imagine many of us have, but I mean, it's literally mid-17th century. So anyway, this bit key that we have is really no different in the sense that the bit makes contact with something inside the lock that removes the blockage. And the key lifts the levers, which aligns these gates. That's what this right here is. This open area is called the gate, and allows the fence to pass. That post is called the fence. What's ingenious about this naturally is that the bolt can't be pushed in, and when it's over here, when the bolt's been retracted, and in this part of the H, so to speak, it can't be moved out, like we had talked about earlier. Okay? And of course, we can scroll through further and find several additional examples of this lock. On the Yale page, I had mentioned all of these catalogs. I had mentioned a test I was taking, and there was one question that was, well, there were many questions that were boggling my mind. Well, I found the answer clearly in the 1937 catalog. If you go back to manufacturers and you go to Sargent, you will find old catalogs as well. Here's one from 1877. And, I'm just, as you can probably tell, I'm awestruck. Rutherford Hayes was the president when this catalog was published. As we scroll through, what you'll note if you look through these catalogs is these lock names that are alive today that you know about as lock, door closer, and exit device manufacturers. Well, back then, they made everything for the home. If you wanted your window hardware and your door locks and your others builders hardware all from the same manufacturer, you could. And the reason that you probably would want that is because the finishes would all match, because this was a half of a century before the standardization of finish codes. So every manufacturer had their own list of really strange finish codes that would be pretty tough. Now, in 1887, when we have this Sargent lock here, this is literally the rim lock. This is what we have, what we're dealing with. So looking at this construction, it's somewhat concealed, but it appears as if this is our Baldwin lock in reverse, where the bolt assembly is on top. And right here, I would guess, is when the bit key, and this is the case ward. I had said earlier, that's the case ward. When the bit key goes in and turns, it lifts this. I would imagine this fence is connected to that. That will go vertical. In the talon is where the bit will push the bolt forward, allowing that lever here to then rest behind this, because this position will be moved from here to here. It's just my guess. It's a bit deceiving that this does not have an angled prep to the back side of it. I would expect that it would. But, it probably works like that, would be my guess. You've got your spindle all the way through. That's always going to work. That's always going to activate the lock and retract the latch. This is clearly a privacy feature here, where you can hit that trigger and it's going to come down and prevent someone from coming in. Maybe it's a bathroom. It's a privacy. Why you would need a bolt on that? Well, you're just preventing someone with a key from coming in is definitely what you're doing. Because I can retract the bolt with the key from either side, but not when this trigger has come down. Okay. This is a bit key. You can see in the bottom they don't need any ward cuts, even though our Baldwin lock has ward cuts. But it would need these ward cuts on the side because it has these concentric ward cuts here. Okay. So without looking for it, we can see that this concept has existed for, at this point, 150 years. And who knows how long this kind of design. So, very fascinating. Now, also, if you wanted to go very deep into the woods on these locks, search for Mossman Lock. Mossman, Mossman Lock. You'll find the Mossman Lock collection in the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York. Okay. This, I had spoken about this earlier. The Mossman Lock collection is astounding. I don't know that there's another collection. Well, I know that there is another collection of locks in the United States, in Connecticut, that I've not been to. Yeah, the Lock Museum of America. And the curator is the son of a very, very well-known individual in the history of, late 20th century lock development. Lock Museum of America. So, this one I've not been to, but it's going to have beautiful examples of the history of locks. The Mossman Lock collection is wholly different in the sense that it has pieces that are steps in the evolutionary development of lock sets. And I will show you a couple of examples of that. Under the Corbin Russwin page in my site, there's an article that I wrote about the master ring, which is an 1890 basically piece of technology that Corbin Russwin popularized. And after having visited, I have a couple of pictures worth seeing. Okay, there's that link that I had just shown. And that's what the entire collection looks like. This is a second floor balcony type of perspective. It's not nearly as big as this distorted picture makes it look, but lots of locks here. And the Hobbs paratropic lock is mentioned. That's A.C. Hobbs, the Han Solo of his day. Beautiful workmanship. That lock would work for centuries. The Brahma lock I had also mentioned. A radial key in its design. I have a Brahma cylinder. I have a Chubb detector lock as well. Then there's the changeable bit key, which is a neat type of lock because you can kind of rekey it yourself. So the smart key technology that exists today, what you'll find is when you dig deeper into the world of locks, there are just nothing other than ideas that are rehashed, because you could easily remove a screw basically and reorganize these bits, and then restack the levers, and you have a brand new accommodated lock. This is a barrel key I had mentioned earlier. There's a hollow. The tip of this key is hollow and goes over this post. Then there is also a book called The Lure of the Lock, which is here, and it discusses the Mossman collection. And you can pick this book up online. It's not difficult to come across. Okay. I hope that this additional amount of video has interested you to search and dig deeper. Do you run into these locks ever? No, of course not. The reason they're important is because they're a huge part of the evolution of locksmithing and the foundation of locks that we use today. Thank you.